Session 3 and 4 taught by Dr. Reams in Black in 1977. This is Tape 2 Side B.
In some other things with this later on in the week that will tie this together. But what happens is that what you want to do is take your chart and you want to get yourself a set of colored pencils. And I don't care what your first test is. For instance, you might want to mark it in yellow. Okay, seeing as how it's the color of urine or something. Or you may want to use red for the first test and then go blue, green, whatever. But you can literally graph a person in to the point where you begin to see stabilization factors. Now, let's assume that you've got a person stabilized with a 5-9 sugar. He's holding a sugar of around 5-9, okay, somewhere in that particular neighborhood. And let's say that he's got a pH, let's say 5.6 over 7.0, and he's got a salt that he's carrying right now of around 20, and let's assume we've got a man of this with these numbers, and let's assume that he's got ureas of 6 over 6. Now we plot him, and do we find that all of his numbers are in the C range with the exception of the urine pH? Can you see that? Okay, now which of these numbers then are we going to be applying ourselves very diligently to diet-wise to try to get into that C range to get his energy up? We're going to be working toward the urine pH. Okay? Because if we can pull that urine pH into that effective C range, then at least we're going to have him better off than he is now. And we're going to have him stabilized to the point that now we can start squeezing these numbers to try to squeeze them all into the B range. Yes?
How do you know with a pH of 5.6 whether you're going to put the person into a B range or the DE range?
Well, we can tell that primarily because the DE range will be acid-acid. In other words, it'll be an acid over acid. The urine pH will be acid, the saliva pH will be acid in the biggest percentage of the cases. Where in all of the ranges up to D or up to E on the straight run, usually you're not seeing a double acid in there. In other words, you may have a like say a 5.0 in the E range, but yet still be something like over a 6.4 or 6.8 or something as far as the saliva. When you get them both acid, then you're up in the DE range. That's the simplest and quickest clue to know when you're jumping out of the individual range and going into that rather select DE grouping up there. Yeah, he said, how do you know, in general, how to keep a person, whether to graph him in a D range or an E range, or whether to go ahead and move up and graph him into the DE combined range? And the answer is that the simplest way to understand about keeping them into the DE combined range up at the top is watch the saliva pH. If the saliva pH is acid 2, then always put him up in the DE range rather than graphing him just in the D range or the E range on the first 5. Because up in the DE range you have the greatest loss of energy, where in the E and the D range you've got some wild numbers, but they'll come down out of there in pretty good shape because they're still maintaining enough energy that they can in fact respond. Now assume that you're asked to come to a person's home and you're asked to do a test on this person, and this is what you find. Okay, 0.8 over a tolerance of 2, plus 2. Now some of your new refractometers, the tolerance is figured automatically. So I'm just throwing that in there for some of the people who have the older tolerance. Okay, now you take and you figure this person's pH out, and you find he's got a 5.4 over a 6.1, okay, and you check this particular person, and he has a 3 salt, and he has a 1M, and when you check out his ureas, you find out that his ureas are 1 over 3. Now, basically, that particular problem was given to you back in course number 2. Graph it now and note that you're acid over acid and find out just how serious it is as far as energy loss is concerned. Where's it setting? Is he all the way across in the DE range? You see him setting up in there? Okay. Now, you can begin then to pick up on the fact that you've got a guy setting up there that has got, the more acid you become, the greater the percentage of delta cells that you have available in the body. Okay, the more acid you become, the greater the percentage of delta cells available in the body. The greater the percentage of delta cells, the greater the loss of energy in the form of heat. And the greater the loss of heat, why, the greater the loss of resistive capacity. And as you lose heat from the body, you are unable to break down and utilize effectively proteins and fats. As you lose heat, you lose the effectiveness to break down proteins and fats. So as a result, you begin looking and you begin to see that the digestive end of your formula shows that it's not picking up. You note that this number also relates across with liver toxicity, this 1 setting up here, and you begin to see that the bowel is not doing much as far as putrefactive protein, nor is the kidney doing much with ammonia reduction. And as you look at the entire system, you see that there is very, very little energy going into the system. So therefore, it doesn't have the energy to regroup itself and to begin to respond. And then if you look at the salt being down there, you see that the ionization effects are very, very limited. And as a result, that this particular person is just not getting coordinative nerve influences, not only through to his intestinal tract, but also to his muscles and everything else. And so as a result, you see a person who has dry skin, lifeless eyes, coarse, stringy hair, ridged finger and toenails. If you check them, he's been in that condition any length of time. Hair growth has started to cease. Hair is falling out fairly easily. Remember that hair is just protein your body doesn't need. So when you're pretty sick, your hair doesn't grow very much. And as we look at him then, we say, well, what has he got in the way of reserve? What can we expect from this particular person? Very little. Very little. However, if we can in fact work him through, we'll cover this so because lunch hour is coming up at 12:30. But anyway, let's assume that we keep him on a program and we get his sugar up to 1.5. And let's say that because of the fact that he's pretty weak, that we use a lot of vitamin A with this particular gentleman because of the fact that we want to try to calm down those delta cells. And this vitamin A will effectively work on these cell membranes. And let's say that we utilize vitamin D to help bring the calcium up so that the calcium can effectively buffer this particular gentleman's pH problems. So assuming we're throwing AD into this man and that we're using lime water, which is an easily assimilated form of calcium, or possibly using a calcium gluconate, which is a fairly easily absorbed form. And if we're also getting green drink down him, not only to help detoxify him, but because of the fact that the vegetable juices contain a great deal of alkaline ash that will begin to swing that pH up. And if in fact we can get this, enough fluid through him, get his kidneys to start kicking out things and start getting it out of his system and start his system responding, and going on a few other things by the numbers as we would think on this man, and quite probably we would be including a lot of broths with this man, things of this nature, baby food, because he's really got very, very little energy. So some of the foods that he's going to have to eat are going to have to be very simplistic foods, because he's not going to be able to digest a steak, he's not going to be able to digest a chunk of bacon, he's not going to be able to digest soybeans and things of this nature. He doesn't have the energy, and he's too cold. He needs more internal heat to break down this protein and utilize it. So all of this stuff won't work, so he's going to have very simple foods. So we put him on an extremely simple diet that he has the energy to handle. Now we know where he's at on the scale of the ranges, so we know he doesn't have much in the way of energy. So it doesn't do us any good to suggest that he eat 3 salads of 5 vegetables a day. And it doesn't do us any good to suggest that he drink a lot of lemon water. And it doesn't do us any good to start suggesting that he take 2 dozen supplements, because he just doesn't have the energy to handle them. So we have to begin to apply food to him that will allow him to begin to regain some energy. And as he begins to gain some energy, we begin to see something happen on him. First, his sugar rebounds a little bit, which is a good sign, but that's not a very much of a rebound, so you can't be overly excited about that. But what we do start to see is that we drive his pH up to 0, or 6.0. We bring up maybe his urine pH to around, say, a 6.4. We get his salt to, or his saliva pH, we get his salt to start breaking up here at around 7C. We get him up to a 2M, and we get him up, say, to a 4/4. Now, as we break him loose, and we start his system by giving it super, super light foods, super, super easily assimilated foods, then when we start graphing this, we find that the sugar literally is perfect, so big deal. We know that that's not going to be, so we'll put him in the high point of the B range there. We take a look at that 6.0, and that 6.0 gets him up into the D range. We look at that 7C, which brings him back to the edge of the B range, and we look at that 8, which gets him into the B range, and now it shows that if our diet has been simple enough that he can absorb the energy out of it, that he is starting to swing to the point where he is making progress. He's getting into a zone in which his numbers are going to allow his body, due to the effects of micronage, etc., the rate of electron spin, all of this, his body heat's going to start generating a little bit better, and as his body heat comes up, then he's going to start being able to break down his protein a little bit better, and he's going to be able to assimilate energies a little bit better. And of course, the fact that we've had him on vegetable juices and things have started to break his acidity in his system. And as we break the acidity in his system, we also begin to soothe some of these delta cells, and he doesn't lose quite as much energy, and he begins to respond. However, that response will be just temporary, because then he'll go bananas, and the next thing you'll see is that he'll have ureas of, combined ureas of 14 or 16 or 18 or 20, and what you're seeing is that his body now is finally getting enough energy behind it, and the kidney function is picking up enough that it's starting to throw this junk out of the system. So for a while, after you get him picked up and get him started moving up the energy scale, then he'll really go bananas. Now, Dr. Jensen says that this is a, quote, a evidence of a healing crisis. Dr. Reams says that the man is withdrawing. Okay? It doesn't make any difference what term you would like to put on it. But then, after he goes through this next stage, which his sugars may be up and his urea is sky high, and he's dumping a bunch of salts, and he's 4M, and his pHs may be shifting acid to alkaline almost on a day-by-day basis, and just the shifting of the pHs is evidence that there's a very erratic and low energy ebb on this particular person. But as you'll see him, as his system gains energy, it'll dump, and that'll cause its energy to be depressed, and then the system will catch itself, start to gain its energy back, and it'll start dumping, and it'll drive its energy down again. And this is what Dr. Reams refers to as a withdrawal, or Dr. Jensen calls a healing crisis, or some of the other people talk about using their own terminology relative to this. And then you'll start seeing him stabilize in a given range, or you'll get a biggest percentage of these numbers in a range, and you can begin to apply pressure to get him all into that range. And once you get him into that range, then you can begin to apply pressure to his diet. You can start bringing him down the ranges. And of course, he will have additional healing crises as he goes through, or withdrawals as he goes through one stage to another, as his energy builds to higher and higher plateaus. And as these happen, you'll begin to interpret that they're going to happen, because you'll catch his pHs swinging on you, and you'll know what is going on. You will note that he is starting to hit another stress point, and then you'll just work diligently with him on diet, try to balance these pHs with your calciums and things of this nature, and finally, after anywhere from possibly 3 months to whatever on a program, you'll get him into the point where you can pretty well predict from week to week to week where he will be in a range. And once you get him stabilized in that range, then you'll be able to predict when he is going to have health problems enter into his life, because when you see the test begin to swing, that's when you begin to realize that something is encroaching upon the system, some outside resistive force is involved, and I've seen people swing out of a range and go get adjusted by a chiropractor and swing right back into the range the next day. So do not miss the fact that structural imbalance can throw these numbers, because it can in fact. And I have held my numbers in a range that I have made up. It's the W range. Okay, that's quite a bit above the DE range that you guys work on. That's where the energy is a -3. But anyway, the point of it is that I have held myself in a given range, charted through on ranges, and noted myself swinging. And I use my swing right now to note that I've gone far enough and it's time to be chiropractically reevaluated from head to foot, including the cranium. And I'll go in there usually to an SOT individual, because the fact that I happen to know one, I have a lot of faith in him. You can go to any chiropractor you want. But anyway, I'll go in there and he'll check me through, and usually I'll feel real bad the day after I've been there or later on that day, or I'll wake up the next morning, I'll have some discomfort in my hip or discomfort in my neck and my shoulders. And I'll get up, and after I've been up for a while, I'll run a test on me, and the numbers are bananas. And I'll get moving around and everything else and run a test that afternoon, and I'm reestablishing myself back in the range again. So sometimes the diet is adequate, but due to stress and various other things, you have damaged the neurological flow, and you catch it, and you see that they're drifting out of there, and you know that something's going wrong, and by discussing it with them and various other things, you can catch it, and they can begin to swing back. Now, by using your colored pencils so that you graph chart after chart after chart, one right over the top of the other one, you can also graphically explain to these people where they're going and what you want to do and why it is important that they do certain things. If you show a person a set of numbers like this that we talked to, where are they at? There, right here. You show these two set of numbers to most of these people, and if they go from this set of numbers to that set of numbers, and you try to tell them that that second set of numbers is actually causing more disharmony in their system than that first set of numbers were, they're going to look at you and they're going to, think you're some sort of a nut, that you're just trying to put it on them and trying to get them for another test or two. But if you can graph those two sets of numbers for those people and show them right on the graph where they were at energy rating-wise in that first set relative to where they're at in that second set, they can begin to understand what's happening to their system. You see what I'm saying? Are you following me through on it? Many times you have to give these people an actual visual interpretation of what is happening to them. Just looking at the numbers is not adequate. You have to show them something visually. And then when you begin to graph and show them swinging into a given area relative to their ranges, and you begin to show them that they have, look, now you've got your first number in a given range, you've got your pH in a given range, your salts are in a given range, your ureas are out of that particular given range. Okay, well, what would cause those ureas to be out? Primarily liver toxicity and kidney stress. Now, is the liver going to be one of the last organs to clear itself, and are the kidneys going to come off of stress last of all? Because they're going to be the port of last entry. And so you can sit down and you can explain to these people and explain to them graphically the fact that they have begun to reestablish internal harmony within their system to the best of their ability, but they must stay with the program, because until liver detoxification and kidney stress and adrenal stress clears to the point that they can get into a single range, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to squeeze their other numbers into a higher energy level or into a higher energy range. And so they can graphically see what's expected of them, and they stick with you in an effort to try to get that liver detoxified and trying to get the adrenal stress off, try to get the liver or the kidneys to maintain a better ionic reabsorption rate and quit losing a lot of salts out of the system, many of which, by the way, the body effectively needs but couldn't reclaim. And you can tell these people, okay, now this is what we have to accomplish. This is what I want to see. This is what we have to do. And then from there, we can reestablish your program to try to bring you from there into the next range down, from, say, C into the B range, or from the D into the C range, or from the B, hopefully, into the A range. So you can begin to show these people where the stress load is still setting on those numbers, and what you want to apply yourself to and how you want to apply it, and then you can begin to make some moves. Okay, now assuming you have them in a fairly good range and their pH goes drifting upward, is there also a good possibility that, among other things, that you're going to have to consider colonics as a means of getting some of the autointoxicity out of the system? So you can catch when you're going to need, or when that bowel is beginning to plug up. If you would see them go acid and see a high salt start to develop and see a high ammoniacal nitrogen start to develop, that's another indication that their system is sludging up and that they should consider colonics. And you can begin to see these things pick up. In other words, on the acid side, here's the three you want to look for. Right here. You get a high, you start going acid with a high salt and a high ammoniacal nitrogen. You know too much autointoxicity is coming back through the system, and you want to consider colonics in these people even though they're not above 6.8. Okay? The fact that the sugar is staying high is another sign that frequently associates a plugged, congested bowel. So, you can begin to pick up by looking at these numbers where they've gone, where you want them to go, and which one of those numbers are under stress. In other words, what do you have to break to start picking the energy up on these people? Are you with me now on that particular sheet? Okay, can most of you now, with a little bit of work, use it and effectively start planning your way through and everything? Okay, now that on your syllabus is what he started out, and I was supposed to cover that with you. And that's the reason why we put that graph together, because it's easy to talk to you about these things, but I felt at this particular level that you needed something concrete that not only you could follow, so you could graphically see where you were at, but that your clients could follow. Okay? And I think that you'll find that this is fairly effective. And you'll also find out that we've got a number of other things in the mill that we are working on that will go even further along this particular line. Yes?
You were going to mention about fitting in the saliva pH.
Yeah, now, okay, I'll spit it back to you. A fellow up in the front said, how do you fit in the saliva pH? Let's do that and then we'll break for the lunch. Okay, that's pretty simple. Let's just simply draw a section out here and pick a particular range, and let me show you how that you put it on there to begin to get an idea of whether the general stress is upward or downward. Okay? Now, let's say that this is the 6.0 mark, and this is the 7.9 mark. So our graph is going up here, and then we'll go over to 35, which will take us up to here. And then we will go over to 24, for instance, which will take us over here. Now we've got a graph of our combined ureas, our sugar and everything else. Now, what do we want to know relative to that pH, that saliva pH? Is it going up, downward, or indifferent relative to the rest of the numbers? Okay, now assuming that we had, what was it on that first one, a 7.0? Okay, assuming that we have a 7.0, then from right here you just draw a line downward to the 7.0, which shows you that the general trend as far as the saliva pH is into a lower or a more established energy pattern. Okay, so that tells you that at least in that direction you've got that going for you, because if in fact you turned around and you ran this pH up to if this pH say was a 4.8 and you run your line up to the 4.8, then you would note that you are losing energy, that that is a clinker in your way, and that's one of the things that you're going to have to consider establishing in an effort to try to balance the overall energy pattern. And so as you go along, with your colored pencils, very frequently you will see your lines extending as you come down into 6.6, etc., which shows you that you're pushing those numbers in the proper direction. Now, there's another way of doing it. You could put a double pH row in there, but that was bothersome for us because of the fact that every one of those sections that's on that particular layout has been assigned a value. Okay? And that particular value will be gone over with you a little bit later. And from these values, you do not need then to do any figure any square roots or anything of this particular nature. and I never was good at figuring square roots in my head anyway. I fooled them. I just memorized the first 5 pages. But anyway, the point of it is that all of these areas on this particular chart are assigned values, and these values are already figured out ahead for you. So all you have to do is just go there and pick that value up and plug it into your energy formula, and away you go from there. So putting a double pH range on that would have screwed up our values, because we're going to continue using this sheet in some other work later on in future classes. Okay, now it's time for the lunch. Yes? Yeah, no, that's just the way that that's just what we've done is we've expanded it. So what really denotes how wide the zone is where the sugar is. Okay? Because here you see in the B zone you can have anywhere from a 1.6 to a 5.5 sugar. And to make it easier to graph, we just expanded the sugars out. So we went 16, 19, 20, 25, 35, so it would be easier to pick just exactly where you wanted that sugar at on the graph. And that's the only reason. On the others, we just didn't extend them that far, because you've got a 6.0 to a 7.5, you've got an 8.0 to a 10.5, a 10 to a 13. You're only dealing with 3 there, but in your sugar ranges, you're dealing all the way from 1.6 to 5.5 in the B zone, and so we just expanded it to the point where it would make it easier to graph. Yes, there's not a particular significance. In other words, the line, the object of the line is to show you where they are at, okay, and to graphically allow them to see it. And the B zone is wider because of the fact too that you're going to see as you work these people into this zone, you're going to have a wider B zone, expanded it out so that they can see that they're still in a B zone, even though their variances in the B zone can be fairly wide. Yes?
Could you explain which time you use the B subzone or the regular B zone?
Yeah, I did. I explained that, but I'll go over it briefly. And that is, if they're carrying a double acid, plot them into the DE combined zone if they're up in there. If they're just carrying a single acid over an alkaline or a normal saliva pH, then plot them into the regular D or the regular E zone. No, we're talking about pHs. Talking about pHs.